Welcome back. My name is Sam Hassel, and in today's episode, we are going to be doing yet another case study for a listener of the podcast. So, this is a 10th grader. I'm going to be diving into their profile with some different thoughts and analyses. So, let's get straight into it. So, again, this is a 10th grader. In terms of their academics here, from what they sent us, GPA through the end of ninth grade, 97.3 unweighted. They put 102.875, very precise, weighted. They noted that their high school only ranks the top two students, and last year's were around 103 weighted. So we're going to assume the student is fairly close potentially to the top of their class, especially after ninth grade. There'll be a little bit of a grades issue in 10th grade that we'll get into. In terms of rigor, ninth and 10th grade took band and exclusively AP and honors. They put here 11th and 12th grade will take band and exclusively AP plus dual enrollment, including university math. AP coursework, ninth grade, AP pre-calculus, AP US Gov, and AP seminar, with all scores of 5 on AP exams. 10th grade, they're currently taking AP Calculus BC, AP Lang, AP World, and AP Computer Science A. So that looks like they have 7 APs so far through 9th and 10th grade. Nice wake-up call to some of you who are not at that level in terms of AP courses. There are many of these students applying to the top colleges. The student's profile is very reminiscent of the last student's profile, also a 10th grader that we reviewed, which is it is very metrics heavy and very resume deficient. If you do have a very strong resume, but not some of the metrics, again, this is not an either or, it's a both end. You do have to understand in terms of just what it looks like from a metrics perspective, what students are doing out there that are applying to top colleges. And then some of the students who have that course rigor and all the fives on the APs in ninth grade and the 1550s in ninth grade and et cetera, also have to understand what the truly exceptional resumes look like. And we'll see some varieties as we go through different case studies. Again, we'll see different types of candidacies with different deficiencies, different constraints. This student's just like the last student that we reviewed, is less so on the metrics end of the spectrum. That's not really the main constraint on their candidacy. Currently in 10th grade, so there is a little bit of a chink in the metrics armor here, currently has a low to mid 80s grade in AP language. So this is always delicate balance. I sort of say, okay, the student has 7 APs through 10th grade. Of course, when you take a lot of course rigor, it naturally increases the risk of you potentially getting a lower grade, right? That makes a lot of sense. You're taking harder classes. There is some appropriate balance here and understanding when you're at certain thresholds where, okay, this amount of course rigor makes me competitive for the schools that I want to go to and preserves as much optionality as possible. But one thing that a lot of people don't actually understand about choosing courses is they just choose course rigor based on their goals, and they don't choose it based on what is the amount of risk here, and also the amount of risk is determined by the student's past grades or what their skill set is. If you just choose all the absolute hardest courses, that's great. Like, you've basically solved one potential problem or you solved for one variable, but you haven't taken into account another variable, which is, what are your grades, going to look like, right? And if you're sort of just pot committed to taking the absolute most course rigor, you may end up with a different issue, and it may not matter how much course rigor you took because you fell into, several booby traps there, or you have several grades that ended up not being great grades, and that doesn't look good either. There is a very delicate balance, and it's sort of understanding what is the amount of course rigor that you need to take. After a certain point, you get vastly diminishing returns in terms of your candidacy and your ROI and your time. Going from 10 APs to 14 APs is starting to pay you very diminishing returns, right? And again, this will depend on the students, right? Some students, some high schools, they could maybe just breeze by in 12 APs. And there are other students or at certain high schools where it's extremely difficult. There's a lot of grade deflation potentially. And it's not the case. There's a lot of different student specific constraints in terms of what their skill sets are. How much are they sort of coasting? Like, how much does each component of their application sort of take them? How much risk is there in that part of the application, right? There's executional risk from a resume building perspective. There's strategic risk, like how unique is this narrative or this hook? There's also risk in terms of your course rigor. Is that going to present an issue in terms of your grades? Your grades are going to go down, then it's not going to matter anyway because you have a number of low grades that are going to prevent you from getting in despite your course rigor or even despite your resume. And so it's a very delicate sort of balance here, right? And so the main heuristic that I've mentioned a lot on the podcast is take the highest amount of course rigor in which you can get straight A's. That can be an A minus, it could be an A plus, but generally speaking, to keep it pretty simple, 90 and above, you take the hardest amount of course rigor. Once you have classes that dip below a 90, and really we mean dip below a 90 in terms of your final transcript or the grades that colleges are going to see, but you're obviously at risk if you have lower grades earlier in the year and then there are drop deadlines, right? If the grade is an 84 or something, there's obviously now a risk and there might be a drop deadline. Or you're going to end up with a W or withdrawal in your transcript, which is really bad. It's really the final grades that the colleges see, but you have to sort of balance against the risk, the drop deadlines, the withdrawals, etc. But the main heuristic is if you have any Bs on your transcript, and this seems very harsh, but we're talking about the most selective colleges in the world. If you have any grade below a 90, you are by definition over indexed on course rigor, right? That is how we define it. You need to take the hardest classes that you can possibly take while still ideally getting A's. Right. And again, A minuses are fine. So this is a chink in the metrics armor for this student. It's not great. And students, again, who saturate the course rigor, which does make sense up to a certain threshold, are at very high risk for these types of issues. And when you oversaturate the course rigor potentially, and again, this is very relative to the students. It depends on what the liabilities of their candidacy. If they're skating by in terms of their resume and they have a top 10 resume and it's on maintenance mode, they built a business that runs itself basically, and this is, unlikely. It might be different in terms of how you approach their metrics. If you understand the teachers in the high school and the student's skill sets. It's all relative and it's all contextual. But if you are solving a problem that you don't have and you basically don't need to go past a certain threshold of course rigor, what ends up happening is you're not marginally increasing any of the upside. All you're now doing is marginally inheriting the increased risk that you get a bad grade. And this is what happens to a lot of people's candidacies because they are operating, they're like in a dark forest, basically. They just don't know what exactly they're doing, right? I don't know how to say it any more kindly. The student doesn't have a course rigor issue, but they now have a grades issue. These are very delicate calculations that need to be made to say, hey, this student may be great in STEM or at math, but maybe they're not the best in English, and maybe this teacher at their school has a grade deflationary track record and history, as it seems like they do based on the context. And maybe that wasn't the best decision in terms of the course to take, right? Because if they end up with an 82 in the class, that's going to be very detrimental to their candidacy and may mean that a whole bunch of their other courses and their course rigor may not matter very much, which would not be good, right? And so you have to understand that a lot of your hard work in certain components of your application can simply go down the drain because you have a weak link in another part of your application, right? And so you have maxed out course rigor, but you have some low grades. All the courses potentially don't matter. You have maxed out metrics, test scores, course rigor, grades, top of your class, but your resume isn't good enough and is the main constraint, right? And your metrics don't matter, right? At some point. So, um, this is something that people have to really delicately balance. And course selection is a lot of variables, is understanding the student's skill set, their time allocation across all the components of their candidacy, right? Not just looking at course selection. And I will say that for a lot of students who are very smart, they cannot back off taking all the hardest classes. It's like too much of a hit to their ego And so they will not make very strategic, wise decisions in some cases because it hurts their pride too much. They don't want somebody to sort of say at their school, why aren't you in AP Lang or whatever, right? And of course, you want to be in all of the AP classes, right? That's best for your candidacy, but it doesn't work like that. Course rigor does not operate in a vacuum. There's another extremely important variable, the most important variable tied to it, which is your grades. By definition, every time you increase your course rigor, you increase the risk of not getting good grades. And so these calculations need to be made much more delicately than a lot of very smart kids make them. And again, the takeaway is not don't take hard classes. And there are kids out there who will not get in because they don't have enough course rigor, right? They're applying to Duke thinking their 7 or 8 AP or college level courses is gonna get them into Duke, and they're extremely marginal, very marginal. There are other people who have a different issue, right? And maybe they played it too safe, or they don't understand that, yeah, they have all A's and A pluses, but that course rigor is not gonna get the job done either. It just depends on the candidacy, right? But, there are many people who just they basically take for granted that they're going to take all the hardest classes or even pass the hardest classes, right? They're gonna run through the math curriculum. They're gonna run through the science curriculum. They're gonna do AP Physics C by 10th grade. You do have to understand you are exposing your candidacy to risk, and the risk that you inherit marginally, there may not be any commensurate reward after a certain point of course rigor. And that's a really bad situation to be in where you basically made a decision where your course rigor is basically the further marginal optimization is starting to approach zero in terms of what's necessary to get into a top college. But the amount of risk that you're taking on actually might start increasing at a disproportionately unfavorable pace, especially because it's not just a matter of your risk of getting a lower grade in that particular class. It is very subject specific and very skill specific. But on top of that, if you want to use sort of like a weightlifting or a fitness analogy, there's local fatigue, right? You sort of do some bicep curls, but that's not very systemically fatiguing, right? Like a deadlift or a bench press, like a heavy compound movement, very systemically fatiguing, right? You get axial load on your spine. There's both sort of local fatigue, so to speak, in terms of students' course selections, which is, how hard is this AP English class and how does the student's skill set and their past record sort of stack up and this teacher, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also systemic fatigue, which is the fatigue of the cumulative effect of all of their course rigor and all of their time commitments stacked upon each other, right? And what can happen sometimes is one class is sort of causing a lot of local fatigue, so to speak, or is causing a big issue, but sometimes also pulling time away from other classes. And sometimes you get a domino effect or a chain reaction, or it's pulling too much time away from the student's resume and they have a big resume issue because the resume is not competitive at all. And you end up with these really bad spiraling situations. And so you have to be very careful in terms of the course rigor versus the GPA and the grade bound. So this is not great that the student has this low mid 80s in AP language. So I would tell the student, their parent, you do everything possible to bring up that grade whether it's tutoring office hours, extra credit assignments. This is the teacher didn't sound like they're probably the extra credit assignment type of person. Whatever it is, just whatever it takes. The question too is, did you have to stay in the class, right? You have to measure the risk. Another question would be AP language in 10th grade. Not a lot of students are taking AP language in 10th grade. What was the logic there? I don't know the student's high school progression, but again, what we see a lot is many of these very strong metric students they do things that just don't they don't need to do them. This was the math trap episode that we did where the student's taking Calc BC in 10th grade. They don't really like math, but it's like then you have a continuity problem, right? So the colleges want you to be taking core subjects, ideally for all 4 years of high school. And so it's what are you doing? Why are you running through the entire curriculum by 10th grade? And if you're running through the curriculum but you have a lot of good options after that. You can take, community college courses and, in advanced math, if that's related to your hook and that's, something that would make sense. That can be okay, but you don't want to run through a curriculum and then just stop and then you don't have anything in junior year or in senior year. And just like, where were you in such a rush to go? right? And again, it's a lot of these metric students where I think they're trying to impress people based on, "Oh, I took, this class in ninth or 10th grade," right? Or but it creates other deficiencies, or they load up all their STEM and they try to cut their foreign language progression short, or they skip a history class because they doubled up in STEM. Admissions officers don't like that, as we talked about in previous episodes. They do not. They want well-rounded students inside the classroom, right? Not outside the classroom, but inside the classroom. I don't know why it was even necessary the student took AP Lang in 10th grade. This seemed to be a very foreseeable issue because it seems like this teacher has a clear reputation, which is why when our students do course selection, what's one of the columns? It's who's the teacher teaching the class and what is their reputation, which has to be solicited, right? In some cases, we sort of have our own teachers that we know of at the high school. But in other cases, it's not possible to know all of 30,000 high schools in the United States, right? It's very easy to get the data, right? Just ask the kids who are in the class currently. Not hard information to gather. Also, for any of you who pick your counselors based on the person who is the school best, also fairly, for lack of a better term, asinine logic, because that data is not very hard to get, right? It's not very hard to understand which teachers are harder, or get the syllabuses, or that's commodity information. That's not very specialized information. This is a little bit of a questionable sort of decision. Could the student have dropped the class? What was the drop deadline? The withdrawal deadline? Is it great that they're dropping out of an AP class? No, but is it great that they're having a very low grade in the class that may end up on their transcript? That would be really bad. It's just not a good situation. And at this point, you basically, assuming you're pot committed to the class, you have to do the most that you possibly can to make sure that this does not, end up on the final transcript. In terms of 11th grade planned classes, the student has a push planned. Again, this is sort of when anybody sort of says this is good from an informational perspective, and I don't want to sort of criticize people who are just trying to give information that helps to contextualize a student's candidacy. But there are people where they have very rigid plans. Like when somebody is like, we're going to do ED to Penn. It's like you're in 10th grade. What are you talking about? You don't have how do you know, you're even viable for using ED to Pen? Certain people have just made up their mind on the course and what the course looks like, and they won't back off of the course, and that's fine, except you're not considering one of the most important parts of building a candidacy, which is risk. If you're choosing your courses, they'll be like, "Oh, this is my 11th grade courses." So again, the student in the Math Trap episode, they sort of, again, were giving the entire slate of course rigor throughout all of the high school. They had planned out, they're in 11th grade. Here's all the 11th grade courses. Here are all the 12th grade. We'll have 14 AP and IB courses by the end of high school. But if you have a major resume issue, it's the Mike Tyson line. Everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face, right? That plan may not make any sense from a time allocation perspective because the student doesn't have a course rigor issue. They have a course rigor that is a top 10 course rigor, and they have a resume that's a top 60 resume. So you're pot committed to continually solving the course rigor problem and over optimizing for a problem that you don't even have. That's not your problem in your candidacy. I'm not saying go take 2 APs, right? Don't create a problem that you don't have. But you can be on maintenance mode and you can maybe do the 4 APs and not the 5 or the 6, or the 5 instead of the 6 or the 7, and they're just so pot committed, or they've, determined the future on this aspect, but you need to be flexible to what your candidacy looks like and what the constraints are in your candidacy, right? And so we have to sort of take this into account. You can't just have this extremely rigid view of the future and then not back off from it or adjust based on the evolving data and the evolving evidence, right? So if a student thought that their hook was going to be X, but no opportunities ever come in that field, or they're not building at the pace they need to be building a candidacy, you may need to pivot, right? If the student has a certain plan for their course rigor, but their resume now is the biggest constraint in their candidacy by an order of magnitude, you need to be more flexible about the course rigor. If you thought you were going to do ED to Penn because mom and dad went to Penn and so did your two grandparents, right? And you've had this vision that you're just going to do ED to Penn, but you don't have a Penn candidacy, right? Do you just wanna stay pod committed and waste that extremely important ED card, right? When maybe you could go to another excellent school that you maybe are competitive for? You have to take into account evolving information, right? And new data. And the risk changes over time, and you have to include risk and what the constraint is and what the problem is that you're solving at any given point in time, given the current resources that you have and the current student that you're working with and all the contextual nuances as well, right? That being said, 11th grade, you can imagine what 11th grade looks like for the students, extremely rigorous, A push, dual enrollment math, dual enrollment English, AB Physics C, mechanics. Again, they're skipping over AB Physics 1, right? Just like when we start to see the same profile, it's like you can literally just predict the moves that they're going to make because they conform to a certain type of archetype. This is the extreme metrics oversaturated. They're usually like a lot of the gifted and talented kids. They're very over indexed on being smart. They're trying to be the absolute smartest kid. Unfortunately, at top colleges, that's very often a losing game. So they have AB Physics C, they're skipping over AP Physics 1, AP Music Theory, AP Statistics. 12th grade planned, they have, dual enrollment Math, dual enrollment World Literature, AP Chemistry, AP Spanish, AP Psychology, AP Micro Macro, and then a dual enrollment, Computer Science, 2 class. And, so very rigorous, basically. But again, this is not the main issue with the student's candidacy. And, two big issues in their candidacy have nothing to do with course rigor, and in one case have to potentially do with because of course rigor, right? So that's the low grade in AP Lang is potentially because of poor course selection decisions and course rigor, and over optimizing possibly past a point that's unnecessary. Now, I don't know if that would have been unavoidable. Maybe they could have taken AP Lang in a later grade. Maybe they would have been more prepared. Maybe they could have done a bunch of, summer preparation for the class, like many students do, who are extremely prepared and very proactive, right? They get a copy of the syllabus. They know it's going to be a very hard class. They start preparing over the summer. They get a leg up, right? We know what the drop deadline is going to be, and we have to make a very, careful risk-based assessment here of saying, does it make more sense for this kid to possibly get to the end of the year with a B on their transcript versus just dropping out of the course and ejecting? That bad grade is a hole in their candidacy, and it's linked to their course rigor. And then the other issue that we're going to see is their resumes not commensurate with the amount of course rigor that they're taking. You sort of have to understand what these sort of constraints are. And so for 11th and 12th grade, maybe what we do is we look at the past and say, hey, this course rigor thing's a little bit dangerous. Maybe we need to be really judicious, get that spreadsheet out, write out all of the variables that go into the course, understand exactly when the drop deadlines are, understand exactly who the teachers are, what their reputations are, start prepping for any classes over the summer if that's going to be a very hard class. Maybe we need to back off an AP or two, right? Maybe do the honors class instead or whatever it is, right? But you start getting very careful because you've seen there have been mistakes in the past that have been made by just, again, doing this all chips on the course figure, right? So you have to be very careful. You also understand time allocation. This student's resume is not anywhere near commensurate with their degree of course rigor. The biggest constraint on their candidacy is their resume. Do you think it would probably be helpful to you to solve the biggest constraint on your candidacy? Yes. Does it take time, a lot of time, to solve a big constraint? Yes. Does the student have infinite time? No. Do we want a ton of time potentially going towards fixing a problem the student doesn't have with continuing to oversaturate, over-index on all the course rigor? Or do we want it going? Do we want to see the whole pie chart and sort of say, hey, we need to potentially allocate more of this time to the resume building in 11th and 12th grade? And so if 80% of their available time is going to be to getting A's in 6 or 7, AP dual enrollment classes, that may not be a worthwhile trade-off. And again, we're solving for a problem we don't have, right? Student doesn't have a course rigor. So we need to back off the gas pedal on the course rigor a little bit and we need to move some time more over to the resume. Now, I don't know if the student can handle 6 AP classes and dual enrollment classes and they can breeze by, and that's only 90 minutes of homework for them a night, right? It may not be an issue. And then so of course, right? It's not a big time allocation issue. And so great. Then you don't have an issue. Then do the course rigor stuff as long as you don't get more B's. And you should have plenty and plenty of time to devote and, sort of assign to your resume building, right? But it just depends, right? You got to look at the picture. You got to actually map this out, like in spreadsheets, right? And you have to analyze it. What does that 11th grade course rigor look like in terms of risk, teacher reputations, relevance in terms of some of the classes to the student's main hook? What does their past record in that class look like? Their track record? What are their skill sets? How much time is this going to take? What's the pie chart of all their time in terms of how it's being allocated? What's the main constraint in their candidacy? It's nuanced. I know a lot of people have these plans, but plans need to adapt to information and data. Some people are more interested in being right than they are in getting it right, right? They want to just they can't, they're so rigid. And again, same thing. You see this with a lot of very smart kids. I would not be surprised if with this student, I don't know the student at all. I have no idea, but I will tell you with a lot of students, they cannot make decisions in their best long-term interest because of the short-term, hit to their pride or their ego, or they should not sign up for that sixth AP class for next year because it pushes them over the edge towards too much risk of getting a bad grade in senior year. They may be applying to Duke, whatever the school is, requires first quarter grades. We don't want to be sending a B in the first marking period right ahead of them doing ED or applying early. They need to allocate more time to their resume because they're late or the resume is behind. We don't want that time being pulled away. And we need the sixth AP class, time to go towards the resume. Right, but I would say a lot of students, they do not make very wise decisions for reasons that don't have anything to do with strategy, but just because, again, they're worried about their pride or their ego or et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if that's this student and all, but I'll tell you there's a lot of students, there's people who are listening to this episode, students or parents, where I can tell you that's a potential issue because the answer is the student potentially does need to drop the class that's bringing down their grades. But some of them won't do it or they won't listen on course selection and allocate their time in the most strategically advantageous way possible. And they'll inherit too much risk or too much time commitment that's going towards things that are not actually solving the problems in their actual candidacy. And it's not anything to do with, you can't convince them logically because they're not making decisions logically. They're making them emotionally or based on their feelings or their pride or their ego or what some kid in their high school is going to say about them dropping out of the advanced topics math class or whatever it is, or the super hard honors class that they should drop because they're not on track to get the grade that they need, and that's going to be a big issue in their candidacy. Okay, in terms of testing, the student has a 1430 on the PSAT with a perfect math score. So they do have a lot of math proficiency. They put here they had an ACT, a mock ACT with a 36 composite. That's not an actual score because it's mock. Obviously, that's great. I don't think the student's going to have any, again, issues with standardized testing based on the record here. And again, based on the sort of the archetype of students. So in terms of all the metrics, everything's going swimmingly except for that one AP lane grade, which is not great. And again, some of this needs to be proactive. A lot of people find themselves in these very reactive situations. A student that I was talking to at one point in time, and they only responded, they only put their foot on the gas pedal when things already had gone south. And those are students we don't want to work with. The ones who they're only reactive, right? You tell them, hey, you're taking this AP Chem class, the teacher has a reputation, there's this weeder exam in the first few weeks. We got to be on this. Let's go. Let's do some summer prep, the syllabus. This is what the top students do. We didn't even invent that. We got it from a lot of the top kids. A lot of the top kids they would do that naturally. And all we did was turn it into system. A lot of the top kids who are the really assiduous students, they would attenuate risk by being very proactive, right? They would be doing the extra online course. They would get the syllabus. They're high agency. They would talk to the seniors who were in the class. Hey, what does the teacher do? What are their idiosyncrasies? How do they teach the lessons? Hey, what should I look out for here? And those are the students you want to work with. They have the initiative, right? Their foot is on the gas pedal by default. That's always what I say. Gas pedal stays Foot stays on the gas pedal until you're told to take it off. That's the mindset. You wanna be the best? That's the mindset. This is my words of caution, whether you're a student or a parent, you do not wanna be responding to situations reactively. You want to be anticipating them proactively. So again, hard courses, summer prep. Get the syllabus from the older kids or from the teacher. Do some summer tutoring. Whatever it is, you want to be thinking ahead. Do you think we don't know what the drop deadlines are for our kids' schools? What the policies are? Whether there's, when a W goes on the transcript, a withdrawal or a drop, or when the first, it's like, do you think we're not paying attention to these things well in advance? You want to see the car accidents not after they happen, but before they happen so you prevent them from happening, right? So again, very important mindset, proactive, not reactive. Outside of my very impassioned spiel about the AP Lang grade and a lot of the associated factors there, again, metrics very good for the students. I don't think standardized testing will be any issue whatsoever. Now, the resume does have some issues, and this is not uncommon for, again, students who are very sort of, kind of like the consummate metrics kids. It's a reality for many different students, many people listening to the podcast. You have all the traditional metrics. Everybody knows how to play this game because they've been playing this game since the beginning of time. Not the beginning of time, but beginning of maybe academic or school time. What has changed since the 1980s, right? It's like take hard classes, get good grades, get good SAT and ACT scores. Like, do you need me to tell you that? And because it's so obvious, it's also why it's so common. So there's no shortage of those students applying to top and highly selective colleges, right? But what has changed since the 80s, the 90s, right? The degree of opportunity, right? Access to research, access to all these extracurriculars, the internet. There used to be a ceiling in terms of what type of resume you could build. And that protected a lot of students who weren't great resume builders because the kids that would have, if they had the internet, they were real doers, right? And real killers. If they had had all of these opportunities, all these programs, the research programs, the access, the ability to email professors at any college in the world, if they had all of the people who were the real doers, they would have taken advantage. But because there was a ceiling, there was much more limited opportunity, and also as well because the colleges value different things. They value more well-rounded profiles. This has changed over time. The dynamics of resume building and the importance of soft factors in students' applications has changed significantly. The delta there is major, but the game in terms of academics and metrics has always been the same. Sure, the stakes have sort of been raised, and a 1370 could have gotten you into Chicago, in whatever it was a couple of decades ago, whereas now they have, a 1550 average SAT score. And so certainly it's been sort of more, right? It's just like more on the metrics. But the resume is sort of a fundamentally different. It's not a matter of quantity, but a matter of quality. It's a fundamentally different type of game. And so the metrics are nothing that is people understand how to play that game very well. And so many people listening to this podcast are in this situation where the resume is just not where it needs to be. And again, student has hard courses, high test scores, or they will have high test scores. They have the metrics, but they do not have the unique resume. And so this is sort of where the student stands. So extracurriculars, music and band, they put primary passion. He holds a leadership in marching band, wind ensemble, jazz band, pit orchestra. I don't mean to be mean, but anytime, same thing as in the past episode, when I read through these and I just see music band, another kid who's good at STEM, who's like oversaturated their STEM, it's just like you have to understand him. Basically, just a much earlier proxy for the same thoughts that are going through admissions officers' heads as they read these applications, right? So you see the same types of students and archetypes and patterns over and over again, the same types of activities over and over again. Math, primary strength. It's kind of interesting how they sort of delineated this, music and band being primary passion and math being primary strength. Um, those are sort of, two important variables that I sort of talked about on the podcast, which is sort of what are you the best at and what do you gravitate to or enjoy the most, and those are different things. Ideally, not just in college admissions, but ideally in life, they line up. They don't always line up. Sometimes you're exceptional at something and sometimes you love something, but the thing that you love, you have 2 out of 10 ability at. That's just the way that the world works sometimes. And then the thing that you're 9 out of 10 ability at, you maybe have 4 or 6 out of 10 passion for. So hopefully the primary passion, the primary strength lineup doesn't always work that way, but I will say that people generally tend to enjoy things that they're good at more than things that they're not good at. So that is very undervalued as well. So he is president of the school math team. He's developing math educational lessons to explore math in everyday life. So far, he has delivered 4 lessons, including topics connecting math and music, as well as graph theory through a national nonprofit. He also provides free SAT, ACT math tutoring through a nonprofit, the math tutoring total commodity activity. However, if it's at least relevant to the student's narrative and it's math tutoring, for most students, it's just like sports. It's just generic and has nothing to do with their through line or their hook. So it's very low value. However, if it's at least relevant, if the student's going to be building a math related hook, then it does bump up a little bit in terms of its value, the math tutoring, because it's at least another extra activity under the category of that hook. Now, that being said, a lot of STEM kids, math kids all do math tutoring, so it's still very non unique. And so you just have to understand that. When I see band and math tutoring, I'm not jumping for joy here, nor will admissions officers be. Other activities, he participates in Model UN, volunteers coaching the city library chess club, and is considering developing a research paper in graph theory. Kind of laughing a little bit about the chess club. Again, a lot of this is conforming to stereotypical archetypes, which is like very good at math, chess, oversaturated, extremely accelerated course rigor, and then later on, not surprisingly at all, has sort of like a gifted and talented student award. So you just understand there are structural similarities between a lot of students, and generally you want to get as much of the strengths out of that, right? So a lot of the GNT, the gifted and talented kids, so to speak, these like great metrics kids, right? You kind of know what they're good for, which is like they probably won't have an issue with the SAT, right? But then you also know what maybe their liabilities and their candidacy. Then you have the kids where all their academics like it's very like comes very hard to them, right? Like, they're barely squeaking by to like get the A's in the AP classes. You have some students where it's like they're taking 2 AP classes and like they're absolutely drowning. And it's like there's somebody who took 6 in ninth grade, but that kid might also have like an exceptional resume, right? Like they have no issue like building networks, leading, leveraging their social skills. And so it's understanding the unique resources, abilities, skills, talents, traits, characteristics of each student as sort of a like unique person, right? But there are certain patterns that tend to repeat. You don't want to sort of ever just be just another. And so we're always very mindful of reinforcing stereotypes. And I mentioned this in the context of Asian Indian kids. It's just another Asian boy who does STEM. And they had very common activities. And there's the Indian girl who does tennis, the Asian girl who plays the violin. And you just have to be careful of not conforming to some of these stereotypes. So I don't like the chess unless you're exceptional at it, because it's kind of leaning into this very like smart kid archetype. It's not relevant to the narrative. If it's not a big time commitment, who cares, right? It's like if this is a half an hour a week, it doesn't make any difference. But just understand, I think it's just interesting from like a perspective for everybody to sort of understand. There's pattern recognition because humans are associative learners. How do you ever learn that the thing with the branches and the green leaves was called a tree? Because like people pointed to it and you identified that object, you associated it with the word tree, if at least if you speak English, right? And so this is how people learn. They learn by association, and they learn patterns, right? This is how human beings learn. We have to be careful about is not conforming too much to a very stereotypical pattern. Private kids have patterns. Kids in Silicon Valley have patterns. Kids in Kentucky have patterns, right? Kids at large public schools have patterns. STEM kids have patterns. The gifted and talented kids have patterns, right? The super extroverted, charismatic people have patterns. The business kids have patterns, right? There's all patterns in these students' candidacies, and they're not lost on admissions officers. You go to private school, you're from a more affluent area, right? Part of the pattern's going to be, you're privileged. You maybe play squash or country club sports, whatever it is, and you generally don't want to conform to those patterns unless they're really to your advantage. There might be in some cases, you're from an area that's very under-resourced. There's sort of like a real underdog story here. That might be a pattern or archetype that you want to play into because it's one that is advantageous for your candidacy, just more generally more advantageous from just a storytelling perspective, as we tend to root for underdogs. There's never been a movie written about the billionaire trust fund kid. Just something to sort of understand. I don't really like to reinforce stereotypes. And so something's very low value and it's a time commitment. It's not doing anything. It's not relevant to the student's hook, but it like reinforces this just smart talented kid sort of notion. It's at least interesting and people should be very aware of it from an information processing perspective on the part of admissions officers and application reviewers. So they have the chess club, pushing the city library chess club, and then the research paper and graph theory that they're considering. Interests and goals: strong in math, science, love social studies and reading. Considering interdisciplinary majors, not health sciences or English. And then target colleges: top 40 in-state college with a scholarship, Stanford as their dream college, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, honors. So this parent had a bunch of questions. I won't be able to get to all of them. But in terms of honors, freshman of the year, school band, academic student of the year, math ninth grade, academic student of the year, fine arts for band ninth grade, AMC 10 scored 90. I'll just tell everybody who doesn't know that's not an exceptional or elite level math score. Davidson Young Scholar since fifth grade doesn't surprise me in the least, based on the student archetype. Again, that's a gifted and talented program. We've done an episode on that. State nominee for honors program in math. And then they have a question here: does it need to have national level awards to be competitive for top tier schools? I would appreciate your perspective on the relative importance of these honors in shaping its candidacy. So this is one question that I'll quickly answer. They had a whole bunch of other questions, which do overlap with some of the evaluation here, that I won't be able to get into, but I think that also will be subsumed to some extent by some of my analysis. Do you need to have national level awards to be competitive for top tier schools? First of all, what's top tier? Right? Is top tier Stanford, Yale, Harvard, and Princeton versus maybe top 10? So those are all top 5, what I would consider top 5 from a competitiveness or difficulty of getting into standpoint. There's top 5, there's top 10, there's top 15, top 20, top 25, all of which are top schools, but there are degrees and there are levels of the game. All right. And so obviously the more you move up in terms of competitiveness tier, obviously the more pressure it is on your candidacy, right, to be exceptional. National awards, there is no absolute prerequisite, but I think what you have to sort of understand is there is some degree of scarcity that has to be accomplished, and how you accomplish it can be from different means, but there is some scarcity at the end of the day that your candidacy needs to add up to. If you have some absolutely weird, wacky thing that makes you a 1 out of 1 and you've scaled it and you're from North Dakota and et cetera, right? You're sort of getting to the requisite degree of scarcity, but it might be by alternative means. The student who has national level awards, or even international level awards, maybe getting to the same degree of scarcity as the student again who, I don't know, is Native American, build a hook around being Native American activism, is from North Dakota, and just happened to have legacy at Stanford somehow, right? It's like extremely unlikely. But you understand that there are mechanisms by which this student being very rare in a way that is valuable to a college. It's not just any type of scarcity, it is valued or desirable scarcity to that institution. But how you accomplish the scarcity can be by a bunch of different means, and it's composite scarcity, right? Which means it might be a heterogeneous mix, right? Now that being said, you can't just be like a 1 in 2, times 20, right? Sort of to the 20th power, because you have nothing that's sort of like in any of the components is like unique enough. It might be that you're a 1 in 10 in one component, but you're a 1 in 10,000 in another component, and then you're a 1 in 500 in another component of your application, et cetera, et cetera. It's very sort of nuanced, but it's more hitting a target goal of scarcity and desired scarcity, right? And so there's a student who might just be extremely unique or have some extremely unique parts of their candidacy. They have some awards, but maybe they're not national, international level because the scarcity is coming from other components of their candidacy. And then the flip side of that might be there's some student where, their candidacy is not that interesting, right? They are, clearly very focused, but be pretty one dimensional and not have like a ton of texture, but they might be an IMO gold medalist, right? Or they may be the best in the world at something or best in the country, right? And so they might be able to hit the scarcity threshold through that. You do need to understand that the top colleges, particularly Stanford, they see those students quite a bit because there's so many different fields and they've seen it year after year. So it's not even just a matter of what is in this class, but it's also the degree of surprise or prediction error or sort of, oh, what is this? And that is still like in IMO gold medalist is extremely rare, but they're not unexpected, right? We know what that is. They've seen it for many years. And so even that doesn't trigger sort of the same degree of surprise or emotional agitation or excitation as a student who has something that admissions officers literally never seen before. Yeah, you could have a student who is maybe like in a very overrepresented field, maybe they're an overrepresented minority, they have no hooks, and so they're not accomplishing any desired, sort of valuable institutional scarcity by a whole bunch of other means, but they do accomplish it maybe by being the best in the world at something. So it's a very nuanced and you sort of have to look at each student's candidacy and sort of evaluate it, sort of as on its own merits and give it its own heterogeneous, sort of what I would refer to as scarcity composite. So are they absolutely necessary? No. It's ultimately that scarcity and talent, which is the national level awards in a lot of cases. Talent is one component. The 6 components we talked about in an earlier episode, the perfect activity for Ivy Plus colleges. Again, I've mentioned this in the last episode. I would strongly encourage all of you, if you didn't listen to the episode, listen to that episode. And even if you did listen to it and you weren't taking notes or paying careful attention, those 6 components I laid out in that episode are what make for an exceptional candidacy at large, not just an activity. And so those components were depth and breadth, talent and uniqueness, and logic and emotion, right? And so students who get into the very tip top of the colleges, like a Stanford, like what does a Stanford kid look like? It's usually not an either or. It usually is a both and. They will very often have extreme talents, right? They may have national level awards. They may be top in the country in Regeneron or whatever it is, whatever their field is. And they also have very interesting passions, right? Because at that tier of college, when you're talking about the 6 most competitive colleges, it puts the greatest pressure on being rare and the greatest degree of scarcity. And it is just going to be more impressive. Those colleges can still afford to reject students who maybe have exceptional talent and they can pass them over maybe in favor of a student who also just has it all. They have exceptional talent and they have exceptional uniqueness. Meaning, i.e., giving some examples of some past students or just students at large who get into those schools, they have, they're top 50 in the country in a major science competition, top 40. whatever it is, and their project that they built it on was a very interesting, unique area. It plays very well with admissions officers potentially, or is just very unique and cool and interesting. You can write amazing essays about it. And so they have both the talent side, but they also have the scarcity by virtue of just being very unique and very niche and very interesting. And again, the more you move up the ladder to the very top colleges, they can sort of demand it all, right? They can demand not just the kid who has the awards and the extreme ability, but then also on top of that has is just really interesting and really weird and wacky and has a really specific niche, etc. So looking at the student's profile, we have we have band. Seems like they're passionate about it. They've done it for a long time, but it's just very cliche in terms of activity. Um, a lot of students are conforming to the cliche activities episode that I sort of mentioned here. Those activities, those 6 activities, which are sort of like a STEM activity, math club, um, music, band, like some community service, like tutoring, right? These are sort of 3 out of the 6 activities. The student doesn't have any, sports here. Um, Again, sort of conforming to some of the archetype. You have to be very careful with these very common activities, right? So for the music and the band, if we're gonna make that the hook, you do understand that it is fairly common. It's not as common for students to make it their hook, but you do need to sort of be aware it is an activity that a lot of students have in their background. The math, one thing you have to consider with math is a lot of students are in STEM. For math to sort of be your hook, um, you sort of have to understand that are you basically elite level talent in terms of math? If you are, that can maybe be your hook, right? And so that's going to be students who are just, again, exceptional at math. It's not a matter of just taking hard classes in school or getting good SAT math scores, but these are Olympiad level kids. These are national, international level, sort of ability kids. So this student's not in that bucket. And so you have to understand sort of the talent liability with the math narrative. You have to understand sort of the lack of uniqueness or the commonality or the clichéness of the music and the band. Um, and then the other activities, Model UN, it's just a club. A lot of students do it, and it's just not super unique. The volunteering, the chess club, not super unique. Research paper, graph theory. I mean, that's fine. Another thing you have to consider with a math narrative is it lends to students who have really outlier ability. And that could be very good on the logical component that I've mentioned of a strong candidacy, like just really impressive accomplishments or ability or talent. It's very boring, though, as a narrative, right? And so you have to understand most admissions officers are not technical. Most people sit on admissions committees are not technical, and there are some disciplines that are very interesting and some disciplines that are not very interesting, and also disciplines that are more accessible to a lay person versus less accessible to a lay person, right? Math is one of those that is less accessible to a lay person. It means there's a high risk of them not understanding certain things in your application. It's also not very interesting to a lot of admissions officers or just human beings at large. And so there are just like the emotional liabilities or the storytelling liabilities with a math narrative come application time. And so with math, as you sort of evaluate different domains, it's like, okay, the student doesn't have the logical components that make them like really elite level in math. So they will lose to that subsegment of students who do, right? Who are just ahead of them in terms of math. Then they'll lose, on the other hand, the other liability of math is they'll lose, just by virtue of sort of the interesting factor, the wow factor, the uniqueness factor to the students who do have areas that are maybe just super niche or unique or interesting or cool, or more accessible to a layperson, right? And so math sort of has a little bit of those landmine features. When students sort of say like really interested in math, right? It's like not one of the disciplines where we're like jumping jumping for joy that like that's the student's passion, right? I'll just put it that way. And for the reasons that I mentioned, usually they don't have elite level ability. They might be very good at math, but it doesn't rise to the level of like, oh, this is going to be their major differentiator. and it's just not super interesting, unfortunately, as an admissions narrative, particularly as presented in the application. And so a lot of you have to understand when you're building a resume, I'm not saying just to totally build it based on this, you have to imagine the stories you're going to tell in the application. Math club and math competitions, like, what's the story? Right? And so, like, talk about when students have a lot of awards, the flips, there's always, again, there's pros and cons. You have a lot of awards, but awards don't make for stories, right? Awards are great for logic and talent and illustrating those parts in depth, but they don't make for great applications, right? And so you need to have ideally both. You need logic and you need emotion, right? You need talent and you need uniqueness. So, these are some of the liabilities of some of these activities. That being said, so we would generally just do a much deeper dive analysis, sort of poke and prod at like a whole bunch of different areas and a much deeper dive discovery process, but this is more sort of high level. So I'm going to sort of take this mom and this student sort of at their word that this probably is the case. The student has done music, that they do enjoy music band. They are good, pretty good at math, even if it doesn't rise to the level of national, international level, sort of prodigy. If we sort of assume that, which we normally wouldn't, but it's a reasonably safe bet, and again, keeping it at a high level. What is a student doing that has some more promise? What has less promise? What's more interesting? What's less interesting? So, again, some of the things that are less interesting to me, chess club, it just reinforces the sort of GNT, typical smart kid, oversaturated metrics archetype. I don't love it. If it's a little passion or it's not a big time commit, it's fine. It's just not gonna you're not building a candidacy around it. The student's not a chess prodigy. For the math tutoring, it's fine. Like, it might be very minimal if you're building a math narrative. It's fine, but it's not, again, very, 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 very common. And so in some cases, you should understand what your tickets for differentiation are and what they're not going to be, right? And from a time allocation perspective. Model UN, unless it ties into the narrative, again, it depends on time commitment. If time commitment's not significant, it doesn't matter, right? But you always have to sort of get an ROI on your time. Also, he participates in Model UN, right? That's not what any college wants to hear, right? They don't want to hear like you just were there, right? You exist. Some of these are also just tentative, like the research paper in graph theory. Again, we're gonna take their word that math is a primary strength, music and band is a primary passion. So I'm gonna say that I like the lessons that a student has come up with. The lessons that they've delivered sounds like they're building a curriculum through a national nonprofit. And those lessons include topics connecting math and music. So I think they're already going in the right area given the current evidence that the student has. And again, what they're passionate about, what their strengths are, right? Their sort of their skill set, but then also, what they enjoy doing, right? And I'm assuming they enjoy doing math as well, not just the band, right? So I think that that is currently a potentially promising intersection, right? Is the math and the music. It's not without some certain liability. So what do you have to do with this, right? So for one, it has to be scaled. So there's sort of the more better new framework, right? So think about three different buckets. Do you need to just do more of this thing? It needs more scale. Do you need to do this thing better, or do you need something new, right? And for students who have candidacies like this, resumes like this, it's all three. That's where a lot of people find themselves. But it depends on the student's candidacy, right? So for the deliver 4 lessons, that's great. Just need to be taken to a much higher level, right? And so if we sort of talk about, well, do you need national level awards? Do you not? Again, it's about scarcity. So how many students can scale up to 4 math lessons for a nonprofit? A lot, because it's not very hard, right? How many can scale up to whatever, right? How many can, again, it's if you're building a business, what is a higher value business versus a lower value business? A higher value business would have a lot more revenue. It'd have a lot more profit. It would have more team members that the student is running, right? It would have, they would be involved. They would have sophisticated tactics for marketing, et cetera, right? They would be selling their products in more states or in more countries or whatever, right? It's just typical measurable impact, right? Typical stats, right? Um, which the student and a lot of people very easily understand because you understand the metrics game on the academic index side, right? So that I like. It needs to be scaled a lot more, right? And this is where certain candidates, like if I'm just being candid with everybody, this is where you see where the true students who stand out, the true standouts, they don't really ever hit a ceiling. They just run out of time. They just have to apply to college at a certain time. But they basically just keep building and building and building and building and scaling and scaling and stacking and stacking and stacking. And what you see with students who either aren't as passionate or they lack certain fundamental skills, like networking skills or how to sort of do this and get it to different, places, the curriculum, or, how to pull together a group of friends and turn this into an organization, or they sort of hit a much lower ceiling and their resume just it looks like a lot of ceilings. It looks like a lot of like they tried to scale an organization or they tried to run a business and it got to like $480 of revenue. That's because there's just a constraint, right? There's either the student's not really genuinely passionate about it, they lack some certain skills, hard skills, soft skills, etc. So you have to break through the ceilings, and this has to become much more legitimate. But I like it. I like it, but I think we all understand. I don't think this is lacking any degree of common sense. He just put together 4 lessons, but some of the lessons and the topics are cool, right? Connecting math and music. Good. Take that topic. What did he build it around? And I think that's going to be a potentially promising route for building some of the candidacy. There's also going to be some potential dead ends, right? So some things that you could potentially explore here would be research with professors or somebody who's doing something at the intersection of math and music. That being said, you're going to be dealing with 2 groups of people. And so this is sort of where you have to understand executional risk in different domains. We had a parent one time where we worked with the older kid, and the dad tried to use like the exact same playbook for the younger kid, but the younger kid was in a much different field than the older kid. And in the field the younger kid was in, you couldn't build the resume in the same way or do the same exact tactics because it was a different domain, right? And so if you're talking about disciplines, for example, philosophy professors, if you're interested in philosophy, philosophy professors do not operate at all like a PI of a major biomedical research lab. A philosophy professor is basically a lone wolf. A PI, I mean, if you're talking about some major, research professor at Berkeley, they may have professors under them in their lab, then they have postdocs, then they have PhD students, then they have undergraduates, and then you're like 19 rungs on the ladder below as a high school student. Doesn't mean you can't get an opportunity potentially. You may be reporting to a graduate student or et cetera, et cetera. So you have to understand there's different dynamics in different fields and different potential dead ends. Some cases, something's very niche, which is great, but that also what makes it strong is it's very niche and unique, like math and music. But that also might mean that there are very few opportunities at that intersection, right? And so if you're sort of imagining people who are in music, a bunch of them won't have the math skill set. And then if you're imagining a bunch of people who are in math, a lot of them won't have or be interested in the application to music. And math professors are sort of more of I would say more lone wolf types. They may have, be supervising, PhD students, etc. But it's not sort of it's not the same as in some other disciplines, where there's sort of a major lab. If there were 2, math professors, at a bar, they might be able to use the back of a napkin to figure out a problem that they're debating, right? But if you're in neuroscience, you got to go back to the lab and start recruiting subjects and put them in fMRI scanners, right? So it's just different in different disciplines. You can pursue a research position in math and music. That would be a worthwhile pursuit, just trying to find research professors. But it may not be easy, um, just for the reasons that I sort of mentioned. So there's some potential tactical or executional risk there, given what that interest is. And again, sort of the different people who would maybe be working in those fields may not sort of sit at the intersection. There are going to be people out there, I'm sure. But in some cases, they may not be like you may have a better chance of building a resume around like some different vehicles. In some cases it could be building it more around you know, uh internship or something, or working with going to local music schools and sort of pitching this math curriculum, or something, right? And so you might need to build in different ways. I don't know if that's gonna be the most promising. It's definitely worth pursuing, but you have to sort of understand, again, some of the executional risk there given the niche. That being said, what they also mentioned here, and this is also fine, not everything needs to be exactly the intersection or both disciplines in one. The mom put here, the students considering developing a research paper in graph theory. That would be more just strictly math, more one-dimensional. That being said, you can still build a very effective math and music narrative and hook if you have some just math activities and then some pure music activities, but then you do have some nexus activities or some glue activities. You can still build an intersection and a niche by, say, having, 4 music activities and 4 math activities, but it's less coherent and you want the glue ideally to be, it's more like what I would say is like organic glue. Like you have actual in your resume, you have nexus activities that tie together the narrative versus what I would say is sort of more like artificial glue, which is you only talk about the intersection of math and music in your applications. Now you can do that. You can just by way of your words and the story you present, you can pull the narrative together at that point. And I will say, yes, we have had students, for example, we ripped out a psychology narrative from a student who purely built a business, narrative and unified the psychology and the business and made it a lot more interesting. And you can do some of that at the late stages, just purely by way of your words. Like you can use like a story about music and then sort of connect it to your interest in math, and you can do that just through your words. It doesn't have to have been something that you did in your resume. However, it's much stronger and much more compelling to do it in your resume so you have actual evidence for it, right? And again, we're talking about top and highly selective colleges, particularly the further you move up in terms of the tiers, the more important it will be. Like the truth, like the students who get into the types of schools that were mentioned, some of those top 5 schools, they will have those extremely niche, unique, interdisciplinary research topics where they also won, major awards, but they're very unique, and they also have the talent component, etcetera. So you can talk about it, and unite the narratives in your application as well without having to put it in your resume, but it's much better and will make you much more competitive to have put the actual, nexus and glue activities in your resume. So the student can do something just like a one-dimensional math research paper, just so that would be just trying to find math professors. Again, you're working with different domains, and some domains are more amenable to others of taking on high school students. Some are very amenable. This is one of the niceties of having a lot of experience executionally is like you learn what channels and domains are, like, highly successful, and, are, like, very warm leads versus, colder leads. Math professors, eh, probably some other groups of professors are a lot warmer, but shouldn't totally dissuade you from, trying to do it. Right? The risk is very low of sending reach out emails, right? It's very low cost. So that's a potentially good idea. And you don't also want to hold out forever for the like extremely niche thing. Do some things that are building in that direction. So would it be great if the student had a music, like the perfect math and music research opportunity? Like there's some person who's studying like this exact topic in the exact way the student wants it to be studied, that it exactly relates to their interests. Sure, that would be ideal, but we don't live in an ideal world. And so, if the student is, reaching out and maybe some of them are maybe more music researchers, might be, maybe like I'm just saying hypothetically, and then some of them are more just math researchers, and then, professors, and then maybe there are some people that you can find who sort of sit at the intersection, but they would probably be very rare, especially for this type of intersection. But you can also take a multifaceted attack and understand that even if you're building the music narrative or you're building the math narrative in isolation, it still is helping to support the music and math narrative. Right. So not everything needs to be the exact intersection, though you should ideally have those glue activities. The math and sort of the question might sort of occur to people, well, why would you not just build the math or why would you not build the music? And the very easy answer to that question is if you build just a strictly math narrative, you're going to get your butt kicked by the kids who are actually exceptional at math, and you're going to have a very boring story to tell colleges in a lot of cases. And if you try to build a strictly music narrative, then you're going to get your butt kicked by the people who are exceptional at music, and you're going to lack some of the more music is academically relevant in some ways. It is a major, it's a minor, but it's not as academically relevant or pure as I would sort of prefer it be, and so it has some of those liabilities as well. The visual we often use as sort of a Venn diagram is if there's two circles, there's one big circle of the music people and one big circle of the math people. There are way fewer people at the intersection in the middle of the Venn diagram, right? And so you want to compete where there's fewer people, ideally. So that sort of is a bit of the strategic picture. The music is also the more creative elements that will drive some of the storytelling in the applications, whereas the math is not as much. Because again, math more logic, music more emotion, more creative, better storytelling in all likelihood. So just being able to see sort of how these things all come together as well in the applications, right? So research, definitely recommended. You could do math, you could do music, potentially a little bit less in favor of the music, but just, sort of hypothetically, sort of more building on one side of the intersection, and you could try to find math and music. I just don't know that it's gonna be, super easy. Then in terms of other things, again, doing more, so getting a research would be new. And I think they mentioned something about, like, possibly applying for a research internship or something. It's like, for what? Why are you waiting? All these people who are trying to get into summer programs is just like, what are you waiting? It's like you gotta wait for the applications to come out. You gotta wait for and then it's a specific time in the summer, and you gotta be there in person. And it's just like there's just somebody who's building their resume with no constraints all the time. And while you're in this like very rigid mindset of like, I'll do this thing over the summer and like then it's in person, so I won't be able to do anything. It's like it's just again, resume building is very flexible and fluid and asynchronous, right? It's just like there's somebody and they do this all the time from a laptop and they're just beating you. Stop with the like, I'll maybe someday consider applying for a research internship at this deadline through my high school. Like, why are you red taping the heck out of this? Like, just start sending emails. Like, it's not complicated. Just start asking people for opportunities. And if you ask 500 people for an opportunity and you can get to 500 very fast, you will get an opportunity. Like, you are not going to not get an opportunity if you do 500 of anything in all likelihood, right? And so one of the maxims that I love is do so much volume that it would be unreasonable that, you would not succeed or would not come through. Most people are just not doing enough. They just don't do enough volume, right? And so it's understanding that component as well. More of the lessons, building out a curriculum, right? You could start an organization. This depends on, again, it's somewhat contingent upon the student's skill set. They could bring this to their school. If there's the music and the band that they're already in, they could try to bring the math element to the music in some way. Maybe they can incorporate some of their graph theory knowledge or whatever it is and see if they can maybe work. Maybe there's something cool there. That might be a little bit of a stretch, but again, just sort of some ideas here. Conversely, with the math club, can try to bring some of the music interest, right? And so, or the math team. I don't know exactly how this like 100% operates or what this looks like because it depends by the school. But if there are any opportunities for bringing the music to the math team, the student does have leadership. They are the president, so they should be able to tell everybody what to do. Then also consider that as well. If those aren't um, possible vehicles, then you can also try to start your own club, right? What better way of like starting something, doing something niche than like just getting it going yourself, right? If there's constraints because you can't bring your math interest to the music or the band coordinator, whatever it is, or the math kids don't want to do music or whatever, just, again, just work around the problems, just work around the constraints. Again, these are where the top students really shine because the kids who don't build exceptional resumes always have an excuse. It's like people in life. Like they'll always tell you why they can't do something. I didn't have this. I didn't have that. I didn't, it was easier for you. You have better genetics. You have this. It's like they have that. It's just like, tell me you're a loser without telling me you're a loser. You got to make things happen. And so this is one of the big differences, right? You could take the phone up to because this is the mom writing the email, take the phone and my voice and put it up to your kid's ear, right? And say, you gotta make stuff happen, right? So, like, things don't always come through. You send emails, nobody responds, right? You try to do the thing in the club, it fails. The band director says no. Like, the kids in the math club don't want to do this. Nobody shows up to your club meeting. It's hard. It's hard, and therefore, that's why most people don't do it. Again, it's this very high agency, gritty mindset of sort of, I'll work my way around this problem. If this doesn't work, I'll find another way. If some people don't like my idea, that's okay. It doesn't mean that, I'll be discouraged for 5 minutes and then I'll move on and I'll figure something else out. These are the traits is what it actually takes. I mentioned this in a lot of podcasts. There are a lot of very smart kids, but they do not have the intangibles. They do not have that high agency doer. They're not very accustomed to failure, unfortunately. And when you're building a resume or you're doing anything in the real world that's not five multiple choice options, you're going to fail a lot. This is what it takes. This is the mindset for it. We have possible ways of intersecting with current school involvements the student has, this math or music narrative. We have either maybe founding a club potentially, or just bringing contributions to current clubs, one of which he's already the president of, scaling up the lessons, the curriculum, whatever it is. We have students who are in the arts, they have some program and they shop it around to the local dance studios or the music studios. Get a list of, whatever it is, people in your community, where you can bring your curriculum to, build out the curriculum, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to start a little bit of an organization, finding some kids who also are interested in this intersection and the math and music sort of theme, great, go start recruiting some kids, ninth graders. If you don't want to be worried about competing against kids in your grade, go find some 11th graders. You can do that. Research, again, you have three-pronged approach. You could try to find people who exactly would be the nexus activity, which would be music and math. Again, I like a lot more of sort of the other types of extracurriculars here because I think it's a little bit more unlikely, but you probably can find somebody, if you're just more open and cast a wider net, you might not find exactly. But again, if it's sort of math, music, in some cases, you might just be a little bit more expansive in terms of like very similar themes, but maybe not exactly. You have to be a little bit fluid to just opportunities coming through, and sometimes the story has to conform to the evidence and what actually comes through in the candidacy that you're actually able to build and execute on. You can cast a little bit of a wider net. Some things I would also look into or just think about in sort of a more interesting way is the sort of the marching band I like potentially here. It could be something that you definitely sort of pitch colleges on in terms of extracurricular involvement down the line. That being said, it still needs to be coherent in terms of your through line and academically relevant. It's not like you're just going to college to be in the marching band. I would think about the marching band as potentially an engineering problem or a math problem. And so you have certain concepts like or fields like queuing theory. So queue like a line. And so this is sort of in operations research, industrial engineering. You have this like in manufacturing, like customer lines and stores, supply chains. If you sort of think of like marching bands, sort of, engineer, formations that sort of can be mathematically described or engineered or sort of systems. This may be a sort of really cool intersection with the student's sort of math passion. I think this is sort of a little bit of the tree that they might be barking up a little bit with the graph theory, but I'm not sure if they've thought about this particular application. I would start the student really thinking about, again, marching bands, configurations, sort of people, geometric constraints or spatial organizations or patterns, and be thinking about this from either a math and or engineering perspective. And when I sort of said opening up the research or who you reach out to or opportunities, that might be another, avatar for these interests. Could be somebody who's working maybe in an engineering adjacent field. And so you're looking a little bit, not necessarily just by discipline, but by like topics. And topics are studied through a whole bunch of different disciplines. There could be somebody who's, a behavioral economist that's, like, studying something, but it's just, like, in a consumer, business environment that actually is, like, highly analogous. Like, this is how a lot of breakthroughs occur, right? Is, like, somebody sort of takes some concept from another field and sort of applies it to this field. You can sort of, again, just sort of think about some of these things in a very creative way and then sort of expand your surface area in terms of people who might be working in some of these topics. Model UN, the student does. Again, some of these things, if you're not going to make them relevant, you may need to drop them, but it depends on the time commitments. So, Model UN, formations, coalitions, speaker order, etc. These could possibly be some. I'm ideating, I'm brainstorming off the cuff. But you have some of these same things I sort of mentioned, sort of like the queuing notion, the formation, the marching band, the math, the engineering problem, just sort of trying to throw out some ideas here. Again, then you just have a whole bunch of, independent initiatives the student can scale, the lessons, the topics, connecting the math and the music, try to get that bigger, try to get some kids, pull it together, clubs. If there's any local music people, I wouldn't say probably like local mathematicians, probably not as likely. But again, if there's music studios, that could just be an extension of the curriculum the students built, which would sort of be like, again, is somebody going to be interested in it or not? But it's just giving some different ideas here of some different possible vehicles. One thing that's really nice is when you can pull a large list of opportunity vehicles, basically. And so if you have like a whole bunch of music city studios within 10-mile radius, you have potentially easy access to scale. It's like sort of hitting treasure troves, of certain things, right? It's like if you found let's just say theoretically, this isn't gonna happen, but let's just say theoretically you went to a math department and you were looking at professors at a college and 15 of them were doing something related to math and music. You kind of hit a little bit of treasure trove there where, all of a sudden you have 15 emails very easily at, like, a very niche intersection that's, like, perfectly related to your interest, assuming that that's the hook. You can look for some of those lists or those sort of easy scale opportunities. Another thing you can do, speakers, right? You can always, if it's local music people or, whoever it is, sometimes students just have personal connections or they have somebody and they bring them into a club. But these are just things where you can make stuff happen, right? You can just get scale and you can, again, just really build a resume. It's very, very multifaceted. There are a whole bunch of different vehicles. That is pretty much it for my analysis here. A lot of this is just sort of off the cuff, ideating, brainstorming, some theoretical concepts like executional risk. Is this going to be more promising? You can do this. Not everything needs to be exactly the intersection or the nexus or the glue activities. Some of them can just be math, some of them can be music. Again, there's certain things that certain students have skill sets for and others don't. So, like scaling a big organization or building a business, like some students are going to really struggle there. And so they need more structure, like they need a mentor. And there's just a lot of these different strategic and tactical or executional variables. And then you have by field, it's what's the market, what's sort of the person. It's all these different variables on top of sort of the creative elements, auditing what the student is strong, passionate about, what they currently have evidence for, trying to make the best use out of their current resume. So you're not starting from ground zero, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that is it. Hopefully, this was helpful to the students, their parents, and everyone else as well. And we'll talk soon in the next episode. Bye bye.